My mother-in-law unpacked her bags in our living room. My wife said, "She's living here now. If you don't like it, you can leave." I replied, "Deal." Then I left the house, which was a rental in my name, canceled the lease and moved out when the landlord came to evict the squatters. Let me start by saying I'm not one of those guys who just rolls over when people disrespect me. I'm 32, work in finance and make good money. Been married to Jessica, 30, for 3 years. We rent a nice 2-bedroom place in the city because we're saving for a house down payment. The rental lease is in my name only because Jessica had some credit issues when we moved in together. Nothing major, just some late payments from college, but it was easier to get approved with just my income and credit score. She pays me half the rent each month, and we split utilities. Pretty standard setup. Jessica's mom, Patricia, is a piece of work. She's 58, divorced twice, and has this martyr complex where everything bad that happens to her is someone else's fault. Lost her job because her boss was jealous. Landlord evicted her because he was sexist. Can't find a new place because everyone discriminates against single women. You get the picture. For the past year, Patricia has been bouncing between her sister's place and various friends' couches. Always has some sob story about why she can't stay where she is. The sister drinks too much, the friends are taking advantage, her back hurts from sleeping on couches. Standard manipulation tactics. Jessica feels guilty about her mom's situation, which I understood to a point. When Patricia needed help with groceries or gas money, Jessica would send her $100 here and there. I didn't love it, but it wasn't breaking our budget, so I stayed out of it. The problems started when Patricia began dropping hints about moving in with us. Comments about how lonely she was, how much she missed spending time with Jessica, how nice our apartment was. Jessica would change the subject, but I could tell she was feeling pressured. 2 months ago, Patricia ramped up the guilt trips, started calling Jessica, crying about sleeping in her car or not having money for food. Jessica would come home upset, talking about how awful she felt for her mom. I suggested we help Patricia find a studio apartment or roommate situation, but Jessica said her mom couldn't afford anything decent. I made it clear that Patricia moving in wasn't an option. We barely had space for ourselves, and I wasn't interested in living with my mother-in-law indefinitely. Jessica agreed at first, saying her mom needed to figure out her own situation like an adult. But Patricia kept pushing, started showing up at our place unannounced, staying for dinner, then making excuses to stay later. Oh, her car won't start, or she's too tired to drive, or she forgot something at her friend's place. Always some reason why she couldn't leave when visiting time was over. Jessica started making comments about how we had a spare bedroom that just sat empty, how it seemed selfish to have all this space while her mom struggled. I reminded her that spare bedroom was my office where I worked from home twice a week. We'd had this conversation before. 3 weeks ago, Patricia called Jessica hysterical, said her friend kicked her out with no warning and she had nowhere to go. Begged to stay with us for just a few days while she figured something out. Jessica was in tears, asking if we could please help her mom. Against my better judgment, I agreed to 3 days maximum. Patricia could sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room while she called around for other options. I made it crystal clear this was temporary and she needed to find somewhere else by the weekend. Patricia showed up that evening with way more stuff than someone staying 3 days should have. Multiple suitcases, boxes of personal items, even some small furniture pieces. When I commented on the amount of stuff, she said she had to bring everything because she didn't have anywhere else to store it. The first red flag was how quickly she made herself at home. Rearranged the living room furniture, moved our stuff to make space for her belongings, started cooking in our kitchen like she'd lived there for years. When I mentioned she was supposed to be looking for other places, she said she was making phone calls but hadn't found anything yet. Day 3 came and went, with no sign of Patricia leaving. When I asked about her progress, she said the rental market was impossible and she needed more time. Jessica backed her up, saying we couldn't throw her mom out on the street. I reminded them both this was supposed to be temporary. By the end of the first week, Patricia had completely taken over the living room. Her clothes were everywhere, she'd rearranged the furniture to suit her needs, and our coffee table was covered with her medications and personal items. Coming home from work felt like visiting someone else's house. Patricia also started acting like she lived there permanently. Commented on what I was eating, criticized how I loaded the dishwasher, told Jessica I was watching TV too loud. When I pointed out she was a guest, she said family shouldn't make each other feel unwelcome. Week 2 was when I put my foot down. Told Jessica her mom needed to be out by the following Sunday or I was going to lose my mind. The constant presence of another person in our small space was driving me crazy, and Patricia's attitude was getting worse daily. Jessica begged for more time, saying her mom was trying hard to find a place, but everything was too expensive or in bad neighborhoods. I suggested Patricia look into income-based housing or find roommates, but Jessica's that wasn't realistic for someone her mom's age. That weekend, Jessica and Patricia went apartment hunting together. Came back saying everything they looked at was either too expensive, too small, or in areas Patricia didn't feel safe. Jessica was stressed and guilty, and Patricia was playing the victim hard. Monday morning, I woke up to Patricia cooking breakfast in our kitchen at 6 a.m. When I asked what she was doing up so early, she said she was making Jessica lunch for work, because that's what mothers do. I reminded her that Jessica is an adult who can make her own lunch. Patricia got defensive, saying she was just trying to be helpful while staying in our home, that it was natural for her to want to take care of her daughter. I pointed out she wasn't staying in our home, she was supposed to be finding her own home. That's when she dropped the bomb. Said Jessica had told her she could stay as long as she needed because family takes care of family. That I should be supporting my wife's decision to help her mother instead of being selfish about space. I immediately called Jessica at work to clarify what she'd actually said. Jessica admitted she'd told her mom she could stay longer, but claimed she thought I was okay with it since I hadn't said anything for 2 weeks. I reminded her I'd been asking about Patricia leaving literally every day. We had a huge fight that night. Jessica accused me of being heartless and not understanding family loyalty. I told her I understood family, but there was a difference between helping someone temporarily and letting them move in permanently without discussion. Patricia listened to the whole argument from the living room, then chimed in saying she didn't want to cause problems, but she had nowhere else to go. That she'd tried everything, and this was her only option. Jessica started crying, and I knew I was losing this battle. The next morning, I found Patricia going through our mail. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was looking for a package she'd had delivered there. I told her she had no right to touch our mail and definitely shouldn't be having things delivered to our address without permission. She got attitude, saying she was just being efficient, and I was being paranoid. That normal people don't mind family helping with small tasks like sorting mail. I told her she wasn't family, she was an unwelcome houseguest who'd overstayed her welcome. Jessica came home to us arguing and immediately took her mom's side. Said I was being cruel and unreasonable, and that Patricia was just trying to help. I pointed out that going through someone else's mail without permission isn't helping, it's invading privacy. That's when Jessica dropped her own bomb. Said maybe Patricia should just stay permanently, since she obviously couldn't afford to live anywhere else. That we had the space and it would solve everyone's problems. I stared at her like she'd lost her mind. I told Jessica there was no universe where her mother was moving in permanently, that I'd never agreed to that and wouldn't be living with my mother-in-law indefinitely. Jessica said I was being selfish and that married couples make compromises for family. The argument escalated with Jessica accusing me of not caring about her or her family. Said a good husband would want to help his wife's mother in her time of need. I told her a good wife wouldn't ambush her husband with permanent house guests without discussion. Patricia sat on the couch during this fight, looking smug like she was enjoying watching us tear each other apart. When Jessica started crying, Patricia jumped in, saying she never wanted to cause problems, but sometimes families have to make sacrifices for each other. I went to bed angry and woke up Thursday morning to find Patricia had moved more stuff into our living room. Not just personal items, but furniture pieces, like she was setting up permanent residence. When I asked where it came from, She said her friend had dropped it off. That evening, I told Jessica this had gone too far. Patricia was clearly planning to stay permanently despite my objections, and our small apartment couldn't handle 3 adults long term. Jessica said her mom just needed to feel settled and secure. Friday morning, I came downstairs to find Patricia rearranging our kitchen cabinets. She'd moved our dishes to different shelves and reorganized everything to her preferences. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was making the space more functional. I told her to put everything back where it was because this wasn't her kitchen. She said she was just trying to help and that I should appreciate having someone who knew how to properly organize. I said I appreciated her leaving. Jessica came home to find me putting everything back where it belonged, while Patricia complained about me being controlling. Jessica asked what happened, and Patricia made it sound like I'd attacked her for trying to be helpful around the house. That's when Jessica said something that changed everything. She looked me in the eye and said, "Mom is staying here now. She has nowhere else to go, and this is what families do. If you can't handle that, then maybe you should find somewhere else to live." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife of 3 years was essentially choosing her manipulative mother over me and telling me to leave my own home. The home I paid for, the lease I signed, the place I'd lived for 2 years before Patricia showed up. I looked at both of them standing there waiting for me to back down and apologize. Patricia with her smug expression like she'd finally won. Jessica with her arms crossed like she was daring me to argue. Both of them clearly expecting me to cave and accept this ridiculous situation. Instead, I said, "Deal." The look of shock on their faces was priceless. Jessica started backtracking, saying she didn't mean it like that and we needed to talk this through. Patricia looked less smug and more concerned, like maybe this wasn't going according to her plan. I told Jessica she'd made her choice clear and I was respecting it. Went upstairs and started packing my clothes and important documents. Jessica followed me, begging me to calm down and discuss this rationally. I said there was nothing to discuss. Called my buddy Mike, who has a spare room, and asked if I could crash there for a few weeks. He said absolutely and offered to help me move my stuff. I told him I'd be there in a couple hours with just the essentials. While I was packing, Jessica was crying and asking how I could just abandon our marriage over a housing situation. I told her she'd already abandoned our marriage when she chose her mother over her husband, that she'd made it clear where I ranked in her priorities. Patricia tried to play peacemaker, suddenly saying maybe they could find another solution, that she didn't want to break up our marriage and could try harder to find her own place. Too little too late, lady. I finished packing and headed for the door. Jessica was sobbing, asking where I was going and when I'd be back. I told her I was going to Mike's place and would be back tomorrow to get the rest of my stuff. She begged me not to leave, but I was done. Spent the weekend at Mike's place thinking about my next moves. Called my lawyer Monday morning to discuss divorce proceedings and found out some interesting information about our lease situation. Since the rental was in my name only, I had the legal right to terminate it with proper notice. I also learned that Jessica and Patricia would be considered unauthorized occupants if I removed myself from the lease. The landlord could evict them immediately, since they weren't on the rental agreement and had no legal right to remain in the property. Tuesday morning, I went back to the apartment while Jessica was at work. Patricia was there, acting like the lady of the house, watching TV in her pajamas. She tried to talk to me about working things out, but I ignored her and gathered more of my belongings. I noticed she'd made even more changes to the space, moved furniture around, hung pictures on the walls, and generally acted like she owned the place. When I commented on it, she said she was just making herself comfortable, since this was her home now. That's when I decided to go nuclear, called the rental management company, and requested early lease termination due to irreconcilable living situation changes. Explained that I was the sole lessee and would be vacating the property at the end of 30 days. They confirmed the termination fee and said they'd send official notice to the address. I also called the utilities that were in my name and scheduled disconnection for the same date. Electric and internet were mine, gas and cable were in Jessica's name, so she'd have to deal with those herself. That evening, I went back to get more stuff and told Jessica about the lease termination. She completely lost her mind, screaming that I couldn't just kick them out. I reminded her that she'd told me to leave if I didn't like the arrangement. Jessica begged me to reconsider, saying her mom had nowhere else to go and they needed more time to figure things out. I told her they had 30 days, which was more than Patricia had originally needed to find other arrangements. Patricia jumped in, saying I was being vindictive and cruel by punishing them for trying to be a family. I told her she wasn't my family and never would be, that she'd manipulated her way into my home and destroyed my marriage in the process. The next few weeks were chaos. Jessica called constantly begging me to reverse the lease termination. Patricia apparently spent most of her time crying and playing victim to anyone who would listen. Jessica's sister even called to yell at me for being heartless. I didn't budge, found a nice one-bedroom place near my office and signed a lease in my name only. Moved all my personal belongings and the furniture I'd brought to the relationship out of the old place while they were both at work. Left them with Jessica's furniture and the 30-day notice. Jessica tried everything to change my mind. Promised Patricia would leave if I came back. Said they'd found her mom an apartment and just needed a few more weeks. Offered to pay the lease cancellation fees if I'd reverse the decision. I told her it was too late. The landlord confirmed Jessica and Patricia had tried to add their names to the lease but couldn't qualify without me as the primary tenant. They also couldn't afford the rent on Jessica's salary alone, even if they'd been approved. Day 30 arrived, and the landlord served them with a notice to quit the premises within 3 days. When they couldn't provide a new lease or proof of tenancy rights, they had to vacate. Jessica called me hysterical, saying they were being forced out and had nowhere to go. I reminded her that Patricia was supposedly great at finding places to stay on short notice. Turns out Patricia's friend network dried up pretty quickly when she needed long-term housing instead of just sympathy visits. Amazing how many people suddenly didn't have space when she needed to move her stuff in permanently. Jessica ended up moving back with her sister temporarily, while Patricia went to stay with her other daughter in a different state. The marriage was obviously over, and I contacted a divorce lawyer the following week. The whole thing cost me about $3,000 in early lease termination fees and moving expenses, but it was worth every penny to escape that nightmare. Jessica tried to claim I'd abandoned her, but legally, I'd given proper notice and followed all lease requirements. Patricia apparently tells everyone who will listen that I'm an evil man who threw them out on the street. Conveniently leaves out the part where she moved into my home uninvited and my wife chose her over me. Amazing how the story changes when you're the one telling it. Jessica's sister still sends me nasty messages about ruining their family, but honestly, their family was already dysfunctional. I just stopped enabling it. Patricia raised a daughter who thought ambushing her husband with permanent house guests was acceptable behavior. 2 months later, and I'm doing great in my new place. Dating someone new who thinks the idea of moving her parents in without discussion is insane. Funny how normal people understand basic relationship boundaries. Jessica tried to reconcile a few months ago, saying she realized she'd made mistakes and wanted to work things out. I told her the mistake was marrying someone who didn't understand that spouses come before parents. That ship had sailed. My lawyer said the divorce was finalized last month. Jessica didn't get any alimony since she chose to prioritize her mother over our marriage. She was also responsible for her own legal fees since she initiated the separation by telling me to leave. The best part is knowing Patricia's plan backfired completely. She thought she could manipulate her way into free housing and ended up destroying her daughter's marriage instead. Now she's living with her other kid who apparently has much stricter boundaries. Some people think I was too harsh, but I disagree. Jessica gave me an ultimatum and I called her bluff. She thought I'd cave and accept whatever arrangement she wanted, but learned that some people won't be manipulated. The lease termination was perfectly legal, and I gave them proper notice. If they'd wanted to stay, they should have thought about that before telling the person paying rent to leave. Actions have consequences, even when you don't expect them. Living alone is actually pretty great. No drama, no manipulation, no one rearranging my stuff without permission. Just peace and quiet in a space that actually belongs to me. Sometimes the best revenge is just walking away from toxic people. Patricia learned that playing games with someone's housing situation can backfire spectacularly. Jessica learned that choosing parents over spouses destroys marriages. I learned that cutting toxic people out of your life immediately improves your mental health. Would I handle things differently if I could do it over? Probably would have terminated the lease the first week. Patricia overstayed her welcome. Could have saved myself a lot of stress and drama if I'd acted sooner, instead of trying to be understanding. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts about people and situations. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. Don't wait for them to prove it repeatedly, like I did. My new girlfriend thinks the whole story is hilarious. Says any woman who chooses her mother over her husband deserves exactly what Jessica got. It's nice being with someone who understands normal relationship priorities for once. Jessica's still living with her sister, last I heard. Apparently having trouble dating because men don't want to deal with her family drama. Can't imagine why someone would be hesitant about getting involved with that circus. The rental property got new tenants within a month of us moving out. Nice young couple who actually know how to respect lease agreements and boundaries. The landlord said he was relieved to have responsible renters after dealing with our situation. Patricia occasionally tries to friend me on social media, which I ignore and block immediately. Some people never learn that burning bridges has permanent consequences. She made her choice to destroy my marriage and now lives with the results. Best decision I ever made was walking away from that toxic situation instead of trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play the game at all.